HS equals HR is a moderately crazy Game of Thrones theory claiming that the current High Septon is actually Howland Reed. So Howland Reed is the Lord of Greywater Watch in the Neck, a region full of swamps and bogs and inhabited by people called the Crannogmen. The actual castle of Greywater Watch is built on an artificial island that floats around the Neck, what you could call Howl's moving castle. Howland is the father of Meera and Jurgen Reed, the siblings that Bran is travelling with, and back in the day, Howland was a close friend of Eddard Stark. They fought together in Robert's Rebellion, and Ned says Howland saved his life at the Tower of Joy. In fact, Howland is now the last survivor of the fight at the Tower of Joy, and so is, as far as we know, the last person alive who knows that Jon is the son of Rhaegar and Lyanna. But despite all this Howland hype, Lord Reed hasn't done anything in the story so far. Robb speaks of the worth of Howland Reed and sends him some letters during the war, but none of it results in action. George R.R. Martin has said that Howland will appear eventually, so the question is when and how. The High Septon is the leader of the Faith of the Seven, the dominant religion in Westeros. The High Septon is usually elected by a council of high-ranking clergy, at which point they stop using their old name, start wearing a funny hat, and are considered God's voice on Earth. So basically the Pope. Since High Septons don't use individual names, it can be hard to tell them apart, but in the song so far we've seen three. The Fat One, who was killed in the riot of King's Landing, then a replacement who was installed by Tyrion and murdered by Osney Kettleblack for Cersei, and then the third High Septon, who is really something different. Rather than being installed as a pawn of nobility, he was swept into power on the shoulders of a popular religious movement of common people who call themselves Sparrows. The Sparrows are outraged by the destruction and horror caused by the wars of squabbling kings, especially that inflicted on the people of the faith. They're angry with the nobility, and especially the crown, who have abandoned them. So unlike the last couple of High Septons, this so-called High Sparrow seems to actually be deeply devout, and he advocates the interests of the faith and the common people in ways that his predecessors did not. So HS equals HR claims that this new High Septon, the High Sparrow, is actually secretly Howland Reed. The obvious question here is why Lord Reed would want to be High Septon. One reason is that being High Septon would allow him to strike back at the people who destroyed the Starks. The Crannogmen are known to be stout allies of the Starks, and Howland would be particularly outraged by the killing of his friend Ned. Indeed, the High Sparrow brings up Eddard's execution to Cersei, condemning the killing with strong words, though any bloodshed on the steps of a sept would likely upset the High Septon. In any case, Howland may be using the position of High Septon to gain power and take vengeance. The High Sparrow does gain a great deal of power. He successfully negotiates for the reinstatement of the two military orders of the Faith, the Warriors' Sons and the Poorfellows, collectively referred to as the Faith Militant. The High Sparrow was willing to trade away almost 1,000,000 gold pieces owed to the Faith in order to achieve this, which does suggest a preference for short-term power rather than the long-term betterment of the Faith. The High Sparrow goes on to arrest Margaery Tyrell and torture Osney Kettleblack, then has Cersei imprisoned and sent on a politically and emotionally crushing walk of shame. He also refuses to anoint Tommen, an important ritual for the Boy King's legitimization. So the High Sparrow has already inflicted a lot of damage to the Lannister regime, but he could do much more. It's hard to overstate how powerful the High Sparrow is becoming. Everyone from Hedge Knights to Smallfolk to Lancel Lannister are signing up to fight for him, in the heart of King's Landing, at a time when the crown is weak and unstable. Tywin and Kevan are dead, most of the Lannister soldiers are off with Jaime, the king's a boy, the small council's incompetent, Cersei's imploding, and the masses are rising at the Sparrow's command. We don't yet know what the High Sparrow will do with all that power, but if he is Howland Reed, the next steps could well be finishing off the Lannisters, perhaps even taking control of King's Landing and the Iron Throne. It might also involve revealing to Westeros the secret of Jon Snow's parentage. As the son of Rhaegar Targaryen, Jon could conceivably make a claim on the Iron Throne, especially if the Lannisters are ousted beforehand. That is of course a big claim, which to be realized would require the support of someone very influential. The High Sparrow could be that someone. He increasingly holds the hearts and minds of the common people of Westeros, and has kings and high lords dancing to his twittering. Howland Reed, as High Septon, would be perfectly placed to spread word of and support for Jon's claim. So what actual evidence do we have that Howland Reed and the High Sparrow are the same person? One thing is that the High Sparrow's appearance matches that of the Reeds and of the Crannogmen generally. The High Sparrow is described as short and thin, with hair tied in a knot behind his head. Howland's children are described with striking similarity. Meera is slim, with hair knotted behind her head, and both Reeds are slight of build, slender, and scarcely taller than Bran. The High Sparrow looks like a Reed. Further, the High Sparrow has eyes as brown as mud, and is said to have been born with filth beneath his fingernails, alluding to the mud that's associated with crannogmen, who little Walder Frey calls mudmen. Further, crannogmen are known to use sneaky tactics. Bran says they prefer to hide from foes rather than face them in open battle. Little Walder Frey calls them sneaks, and says you never see them, but they see you. The World of Ice and Fire says they're small, sly, and secretive. All of this stuff seems very consistent with the tactic of infiltration to indirectly attack enemies and reveal secrets. Also, crannogmen seem to be connected to greensight and other magical powers. The World of Ice and Fire suggests that crannogmen were close to the Children of the Forest, and might have even intermarried with them, which could explain their small stature, as well as the green eyes and greensight that we see in Jojen. If the crannogmen have magical insight, they may, as Maester Luwin suggests, have secret knowledge. When Mira and Jojen swear Greywater Watch to Winterfell, they use an unusual oath, swearing by ice and fire, which alludes to Jon's Stark and Targaryen blood. So maybe the Reeds, perhaps through Jojen, know about Jon's importance as the prince that was promised, or a head of the dragon with 3 heads, or Azor Ahai, or whatever prophecy you want to use to indicate his great magical importance. It's unclear how this could connect to Jojen and Bran and the Three-Eyed Raven, but it seems possible that Howland Reed knows something about Jon's significance, which may motivate his ploy to play High Sparrow. And one very quick last thing is this quote from Varys. Power, sneaky shit, small man, large shadow. But yeah, moving on. So, there is some evidence, if vague evidence, for HS equals HR. But there are also problems. First is Howland's absence from the Neck. The High Sparrow has been spending a great deal of time walking around Westeros, gathering support, building up the movement of sparrows. If Howland has been absent from his home all this time, who's leading his people in this time of war? His kids have wandered off beyond the wall and could be dead for all he knows. His wife Diana is presumably still at Greywater, governing perhaps, but we really know nothing about her. Things are only getting crazier up north, with Baratheons, Boltons, Ironmen, Clansmen, Wildlings, others. Surely Howland couldn't abandon his family and people at a time like this. Another problem is that of a Northman becoming High Septon. In the North, people follow the Old Gods, not the Seven, and the closeness of the crannogmen to the Children of the Forest and the magic of the Old Gods further separates them from the new faith. The High Sparrow surely has demonstrated a deep religiosity and knowledge of the faith. He says he tended to 100 little villages, performing marriages, absolving sinners of their sins, naming newborn children. How could a Northman, someone from an extremely different culture, convincingly perform all this religious service, let alone become the ultimate religious leader of the faith? Howland being High Septon is like a Buddhist becoming Pope, or a Jew becoming an Imam. It's conceivable that Howland has studied the faith of the Seven, or follows it even, secretly, I guess, but it's all very implausible. Ultimately, the biggest problem with HS equals HR is that it doesn't make sense as a plan. For the theory to be true, Howland must have sat down one day during the war with winter coming and decided that the best plan of action was for him to go wander the Riverlands on foot, performing religious service for a foreign religion until he manages to become the leader of a popular uprising and then become the High Septon, a position with power sufficient to strike at the crown or support Jon Snow, all the while hiding his identity and faking faith. Like, seriously? And the plan relies not only on a popular movement that Howland surely couldn't have predicted or single-handedly created, but also on a degree of political instability that not even Littlefinger accurately predicted. It would make far more sense for Howland to stay in the north. That way he could protect his family and homeland from the increasingly bloody war in the north and strike against the Boltons, who betrayed Robb and perpetrated the Red Wedding. He might not be able to support Jon's claim on the throne, but he could support Jon's claim on the north. In a Catelyn chapter of A Storm of Swords, Robb names Jon his heir as king in the north. Right after, Robb sends Mage Mormont and Galbert Glover with a letter to Howland Reed. So assuming they made it, Howland probably knows that Jon is the heir to the north, as well as the son of Rhaegar. It may be that he's been working with Mage and Galbert ever since, which would explain where the three have been all this time. Staying in the north wouldn't help Howland strike at King's Landing, but would a reclusive crannogman really prioritize attacking a distant capital over protecting his home? The only real disadvantage to staying in the north is that it couldn't allow Howland to dramatically reveal R+L=J to the realm, but George R. R. Martin is already setting up for that revelation to happen in a very different way. Jon's parentage is probably going to be revealed with Bran's magical powers. In A Dance with Dragons, Bran has visions of past events that happened in front of weirwood trees. Now, we know that northern marriage customs involve a ceremony in front of a weirwood tree, and we know that just before the rebellion, Rhaegar and Lyanna were at, or at least very near, the Isle of Faces, which is the site of the only weirwood grove south of the Neck, and which has been named by George R. R. Martin as somewhere that will come to the fore in later books. George R. R. Martin is setting up for Bran to have a vision of Rhaegar and Lyanna's secret marriage at the Isle of Faces, which presumably would lead to a revelation of Jon's parentage. It's almost foreshadowed by Bran's unwitting discovery of Cersei and Jaime's incest. He saw a relationship that he wasn't supposed to, with big implications for the parentage of the star-crossed lovers' children. So we don't need some complicated and implausible contrivance to reveal R+L=J. Bran's visions are already about to do it. Admittedly, while Bran's visions could reveal R+L=J to Bran and maybe to Jon, it would take something more for everyone else in Westeros to find out. If Jon was to make a claim on the throne as a Targaryen, he would need more than the word of a tree boy to back him up, and as suggested before, Howland Reed as High Sparrow would be well placed to do that. So HS=HR doesn't have any strong evidence, and is pretty implausible in a bunch of ways. There are some tantalizing facts that kind of back it up, but all of those facts are still compatible with the simpler explanation, that Howland is still in the north, and that the High Sparrow is just what he seems. So HS=HR is a cool theory, but it's probably not true. Thanks for watching. Subscribe if you want to see more.